Hello and welcome to Unwind Sessions, where right after my shift I give the highlights of my workday and answer any questions that might have been asked at a previous session. My name is Juan. I am an English Spanish medical video remote consecutive interpreter with over 4 years of experience. Today is Wednesday, May 19, 2021. And today I took a total, well, I should say I answered a total of 41 sessions. But for some reason today there were a lot of sessions that were not connecting, probably around 10 sessions that I answered and then nothing happened. So I just had to hang up and wait for the next session. So I would say I took just like the average that I always take, around 32 sessions today, and they were a mix between phone sessions and audio sessions like they always are. But today they were much more um, video sessions during the first half of my shift, and I thought I wasn't going to get any audio sessions, but I did like the last 2 or 3 hours of my shift. I work an 8-hour shift, by the way. I was able to get some audio sessions, which are always nice because you can just relax and slouch and just sit however you want to. Because of course, in the video sessions, you always have to be sitting up straight and looking at the camera all of the time. So audio sessions are always a nice break from the video sessions. And today was also a pretty chill day. There was like a lot of, well, not a lot of wait time, but there was some wait time between sessions, which is something that hasn't happened in a while. It happened today and it happened yesterday, so it's always nice to work less. Of course, I mean, not that the job is all that hard. It is stressing sometimes when the sessions are full of vocabulary and you have a lot of problems. But for the most part, this is a job that um, I really like, and most of the time it's not that hard to do once you actually are used to it, and of course when you have some experience under your belt. So let's get to it. So today I learned a new word, and the patient used the following word. She said compota. Now I had no idea what this word meant, and I asked her what it was, and then she said she didn't know another word for it. So I actually had to look it up. And when I looked it up, the provider had an idea of what I was asking, and she said, I think she's trying to say compote. And of course, that is the correct translation, but I had no idea what a compote was either. And I looked it up, and the Google definition says that it is a fruit preserved or cooked in syrup. So basically, it was a preserve. So that is a new word for me today, compote, compota, and it was just basically a preserve. So something that I am familiar with. I was just not familiar with that word. So, but the provider knew it. So, provider one, interpreter zero, right? He beat me to it. So, not a problem, and that was pretty much it. There were no real hard sessions today. Oh, I forgot. One thing I was going to mention, there was this session about a lady, and she was getting a vaccine for you know what. And when she was getting the vaccine, they asked her date of birth, and this was an old lady. She was born in the 50s. So when they asked her date of birth, she said that she was born in the 90s. And of course, I saw her and I said, well, this can't be right. So I went ahead and then I asked her, can you repeat your birthday? And then she said in the 90s again. So I looked confused, and then she looked at me, and she must have seen my reaction because she said, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, not in the 90s. It's actually in the 50s." So we actually had a little bit of a laugh right there. So this lady thought she was 20 again, and she was more like 70. So yeah, that was just a little funny thing that happened today that I wanted to mention. So that was pretty much the highlights of today. So I am going to go ahead and read a suggestion from one of our viewers. His name is LeoBG95, and it's nice to hear from you again. And he says, or she says, I'm not sure. Let me know. Um, I mean, Leo. I guess I could assume that's a guy. So maybe you could. He says maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience in your first days as an interpreter. What kind of calls or what were the difficult parts, and if you practice when you finished your shift? Thanks. And you are very welcome. Nice to hear from you, and a very nice suggestion because I was running out of things to talk about. How come I didn't think about this, right? So genius, genius. Let's go. Well, I'm going to talk about the very first session that I ever took. The very first day, I still remember it like it was yesterday. It was, no, I'm just kidding. I remember the session, but I don't remember what it was about or anything. I do remember the date though. It was January 20th, 2017. That is a date that I'm never going to forget. Believe me, and that's a date that changed my life. So I logged into my shift in my computer. I picked up my call because it was just phone sessions at that time. I was not taking video sessions at all. It was all just phone sessions. So I put on the headset. I log into the phone because I didn't even have a computer. I had my personal computer, but I didn't have a computer. The company didn't give me a computer just yet. They usually gave you a computer like 3 or 4 months after you had been working. So I was on my headset, I was on my little phone, and I logged in. And then all of a sudden, when I hear the provider, or the client, I should say, when the client came in and she started talking, I remember the first thing that I thought, I was like, oh man, this is actually a real person. This is going to be my first interpretation. And she spoke, and then as soon as she spoke and she said something, and then I had to interpret it, I remember thinking, oh man, this is my very first interpretation, like my very first real interpretation that I'm doing for someone. And it was pretty easy. It was just like in the practice sessions. It was not hard at all. And the first session, there was no vocabulary that I didn't know. So it was my very first session, and I did very well. Of course, it wasn't a hard session, so it was expected for me to actually do well in that session. And right when I finished, I remember we had a little bit of a break between sessions. I still do in the company that I work for now, but in the company that I worked for before, we had less of a break. And I remember thinking, oh man, I just finished my first interpreting session, and that was not that bad at all. I think I am ready for the next one. And then the next one came in, and I just got through it. And I got through the whole day without a problem. And at the end of the day, I felt very proud of myself, and I knew that this was a job that I would actually be able to do, and that it's a job that I really, really, really liked. So that was my very first day. And as far as the type of sessions that I was taking back then when I first started, it was just customer service. It was utility companies, insurance, car, property, health, not recorded statements though for insurance, and just bank calls, credit cards, schools, hospitality, and medical insurance, which I already mentioned. And to be honest, these sessions were not that hard. They were just pretty much straightforward. But terminology was, of course, one of the hardest things that I had to work on and that I had to actually get over because I mean, there's a lot of calls and a lot of technical vocabulary that is used in every of this in any of these customer service sessions, and if each session is different, and of course the different nationalities that you have to work with and the different accents. I would say those were the hardest things, like actually knowing words from different regions. And now I could say that I know most of them. Of course, every once in a while they might throw a curveball at me, and I will not know what a certain word is, or regionalism, or something like that. But I mean, the only thing that I could do for that was just to practice. And whenever something just came up, like a word that I didn't know, the first thing that I would do is, since I was using notebook and paper, I would actually write it out and then I would put a big circle. I would circle it, and I knew that that was a new word, and that new word, I actually had to add it into my glossary, because I was writing a glossary back then, because there was a lot of words that kept on coming up that I didn't know. So I decided that it would be a good idea for me to actually write a glossary. So that way, if these words actually happen to come back again at another session, I was ready, man. I had my little notebook right there next to me, and I knew that if I ever had that word again, I had it in my glossary and I would nail it because it was right there in my glossary. One thing that I do want to say is something that made the sessions hard, especially for the bank calls, credit cards, and some insurance sessions. What really made them hard is that some of these sessions I had to interpret disclosures or disclaimers. And if you've ever had to interpret them, um, you know how hard it is, because I mean they're just reading off a piece of paper, and some of the clients, they expect you to remember everything, and they might read like 10 pages, and then they're okay, interpreter, go ahead and just interpret what you said. So it's hard. It's hard. So one suggestion that I have for you is that whenever someone is going to give you a disclosure or a disclaimer, and you know they're just gonna be reading off like a ton of words, what you have to tell them is, you have to tell them, because they're not gonna do. Most of them are not going to do it on their own. You have to tell them. I'm sorry, this is the interpreter. Could you please give me shorter segments? Maybe read a sentence or two, three sentences at a time, and then let me interpret, and then we could do it like that. Because if you don't do it like that, you are going to be overwhelmed. And of course, if it's your very first disclosure or disclaimer, they use very, very, very technical and legal, or legal language that you're probably not going to be used to, so you're going to have to be looking everything up real fast. So it's going to save your life, and it's going to just make it easier if you ask them to give you shorter segments. So, having said that, I noticed that I was getting a lot of disclosures and a lot of disclaimers from the same companies. So the company that I worked for actually provided us with documents for some of the clients that had those disclosures and some of the disclaimers, but not for all of them. So I started to take notes of the names of the companies that actually had disclaimers or disclosures, and what they actually talked about, like the topics. And once I already had that information right after my shift, I would go into the computer online and I would search. I would search until I was tired and I knew that I had actually found it, or I just gave up and I knew that there was no way that I was going to find that disclaimer or that disclosure. But I was able to find a lot of them. Of course, I was not able to find them all, but one thing is that many disclosures and many disclaimers have a very same wording. So once you're actually familiar with one, it'll make the rest easier. Of course, every one of them is going to have their own different terms, and but once you actually get it once, and you make sure you write down the words that you don't remember, that are hard, or that this is the first time that you were hearing them, and the next time that you actually happen to come across this disclaimer or this disclosure, then you will actually have your glossary or your little cheat sheet, and you will actually be ready, and believe me, you will nail that disclosure or that disclaimer. So that is one of the things that really helped me with that disclosures or disclaimers. That as soon as I heard that it was that company, I would pull up the documents that I had for that company, and I would be ready, man. If as soon as I heard that the person, the client was going to give a disclosure, I made sure that it was the correct one, and then I would just I would just interpret what I was reading from the disclosure, but I didn't have to worry about taking notes anymore. I only had to worry about just reading the disclosure, and actually whatever the I actually kept it in English. So as I was reading the sentence, and one thing that I noticed that I can actually do is that as I am reading a sentence, I can actually be interpreting at the same time. Like I can actually read a sentence in English, and right away I could interpret it in Spanish as I am reading it. So that is an actual nice skill to have, and it actually helps. I do have to say sometimes that some of the disclaimers and some of the disclosures, because of their nature, they were already translated into Spanish, so that made it even easier. Like whenever I had a disclosure that was in Spanish, I didn't even have to worry about anything. I just waited for the person to actually be done reading their disclosure, and then I would or disclaimer, and then I would just go ahead and just read it off the paper, and voila, instant translation, right? Another thing, okay, so did I study right after my shift? And I did, but not as much as you actually would think. Of course, I already had my I had my glossaries. So right after my shift, one thing that I would actually do is I would actually get my little glossary notebook, which I still have by the way, but I am no longer writing things in there. There hasn't been that many like really hard words that I've actually come across that I have actually been repeated. So I no longer keep a glossary. But I did back then because there was just a ton of words. Every day I was getting words that I didn't even know what they meant. Um, because I had to expand my vocabulary, of course. So everything that I wrote down there on the notebook, every day religiously, right after my shift, the first thing that I would do is that I would get this notebook, and then I would read the list of the words and the translations of the words that were there on my glossary, and I would test myself in English and Spanish, and I would just do it once in English and once in Spanish. And the words that I actually had down, I would actually, I wouldn't scratch them out, but I would put like a little star next to it. That way I could identify that I already knew this word, and of course, right after my shift, I no longer had to study it because I already had it down. I would say that is one of the things that really helped me the most in expanding my vocabulary. And another thing that I did is that the company that I used to work for actually went ahead and gave us a list. I still have that list today. They gave us a list of vocabulary just for all of the companies that we would work for, like cell phone companies. They actually gave us vocabulary for body parts, regular body parts. Not that I was doing any medical sessions or anything at that time, so I didn't really focus on the medical terms, but I was taking 911 calls. That is something that I forgot to mention. And so I was practicing all of that, the list of the vocabularies, except for like the medical vocabulary, like anatomy and just medical terms, medical professions, all of that. I didn't worry about that because, of course, I wasn't taking any medical sessions at that time, but they were included in the list of vocabulary that the company provided us. So it was nice. So I already had something to go on when I actually was starting to become a medical interpreter. But what I would do is that I would have those lists, that vocabulary list, right there on my neck, on my desk as I was working. And whenever I had to wait for a provider, or whenever I was in my break, or just in the middle of a session, like, well, not in the middle of a session, but like at the little, like if I was waiting to receive another phone call, or just that little break that you get between phone calls, during that time, I would just look it over. I wouldn't say I would study it, like actually study it, but I would just look up the vocabulary list and the translation, and I would just read it. I would just flip the pages, and then I would just read it, not really studying or anything. And I noticed that that really helped me. After a while, I don't know how long. I'd be lying if I tell you how long. But after a while, I already knew most of those words. Of course, I didn't know all of them. There were always words that I would struggle on. But I would say, like, probably out of the, now I'm taking a guess here, out of the 100 or 200 words that were on the list, probably I would struggle on about 20. But I had the rest of them down, of course, because I was looking at them every day. And uh, that is one of the things that actually helped me expand my vocabulary as well. And um, I would say that was pretty much it. That was pretty much it, the practice that I actually had whenever I started working. So it was just that. It was just having the vocabulary list that I actually had, that the company provided me, and I would just read it over whenever I had a chance. But I would read it every day. And the glossary of the new words that I was learning every day. And I would say that that is some golden information right there. Of course, you're gonna have to practice your vocabulary, and that is going to make you a better interpreter if you really think about it. I mean, the thing besides note taking and besides memory retention and everything else, active listening and everything else that you have to do as an interpreter, I think vocabulary is the number one thing that I struggled on. And of course, studying and practice is the only way that I happen to get over it. So I would recommend to you is just to study the vocabulary as much as you can. So that is going to be pretty much it for me today, guys. Uh, I would like to ask something from you. I would like to know, as new interpreters, what are you guys struggling on the most? Um, and since everybody is different, I know everybody is going to be struggling on different things, and that is just going to give me ideas of topics, of things that I can talk about. Because I mean, I don't want to fill you guys with stories about neural networking and stuff, which is something that I'm really interested in right now. But I don't really think it really gives you that much knowledge, right? Uh, but I mean, it's something nice to think about because I mean, that's the reality of it. So yeah, go ahead and leave it in the comments. What are you guys struggling on with the most as new terps? And even if you guys are already professionals and you guys are already working, just let me know what you struggled on the most or what you're still struggling with. Like for example, me right now, I would say what is one of the things that I'm struggling with the most? I would say sometimes I struggle with like being able to stay awake in some sessions. And I've actually talked about that before. The very first session that I did on YouTube, I actually talked about that. It's not something that I struggle with every day, but it's something that it does happen every once in a while. So, okay, and that will be pretty much it for me today. Like I said, please leave your questions or on the comments, and I will answer some of them on the next session. Remember that I'll be here every Monday through Friday right after work. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and if you like the video and have not done so, for more content. And don't forget to share. Happy interpreting. Goodbye.